This happened about 3 years ago, during the first winter after I moved to Oregon. I'd just started freelancing full-time, which meant I worked odd hours and often stayed up late into the night. The house I was renting was small. Just a one-bedroom with floors that creaked with every step and an old heater that hummed like a distant generator. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was quiet, and after a really bad breakup, quiet was all I wanted. My only real neighbor was Mrs. Dale, a sweet elderly woman who lived across the street with her little dog. She always made a point to wave from her porch, and sometimes she'd leave cookies by my mailbox. One day, she told me how safe the neighborhood was, but that it used to be different, years ago, before what she called the break-ins. I didn't think much of it at the time. I should have. The first strange thing started with the motion sensor camera I'd installed. I put one up by the front porch, more out of habit than any real fear. Then, one night, around 2:14 in the morning, my phone pinged with an alert, motion detected. I was half asleep, but I groggily opened the app, and there was someone standing on my porch. It wasn't a blur from a spiderweb or a glitch in the system. The figure was tall, wrapped in a dark jacket, and their face was completely obscured by the glare from the porch light. They weren't trying to open the door or peek in the windows. They were just standing there, perfectly still, facing my front door. I froze, my eyes glued to the screen. My heart started hammering against my ribs. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 15 seconds, the figure slowly, deliberately, turned toward the camera. The light caught just enough of their face to show a faint, chilling smile before the feed cut out completely. My phone showed signal lost. I sat bolt upright in bed, listening for any sound outside. Nothing. No footsteps crunching on the gravel. No car engine starting up, just the hum of the old heater. After what felt like forever, I finally gathered the courage to peek through my blinds. The porch was empty. I told myself it was just a technical glitch, a weird coincidence. But I still got up and checked the deadbolt twice. The next morning, my unease turned to dread. There were muddy footprints leading from my porch steps all the way to my backyard gate. I immediately called Mrs. Dale to ask if she'd noticed anything strange. She said she hadn't, but then she told me something that made my blood run cold. 2 weeks earlier, she'd found her own back gate wide open and her recycling bins knocked over. She just assumed it was raccoons. That night, I left every light on. I stayed awake until 3 a.m., mindlessly scrolling my phone. My body tense, half expecting another alert, but nothing came. The night was silent. The next morning, though, I walked outside to find that my front doormat was gone. Just vanished. Over the next few days, I started noticing small, unsettling changes inside the house. A spoon left on the kitchen counter when I was sure I hadn't cooked. My keys on the coffee table instead of their usual hook by the door. It was the kind of thing you could easily dismiss as forgetfulness, chalk it up to stress, until it wasn't. On the fourth night, I woke up around 2:10 a.m. to the faint, distinct sound of my doorbell. A single, soft chime, then another, then silence. My heart leaped into my throat. I grabbed my phone and checked the camera feed. It was working perfectly this time, but there was no one at the door. The porch was empty. Then, I saw it. A notification from the app. Motion detected. But the alert hadn't just come through. It had come through 5 minutes before I woke up. I checked the time stop, 2:14 a.m. The exact same time as the first night. That's when the cold wave of terror washed over me. This wasn't random. I called the police, my voice shaking as I explained everything. The figure, the footprints, the missing mat, the doorbell. The officer on the phone was calm and said they'd descend a patrol car to check things out. I hung up, turned off every light in the house, and waited by the window, clutching a heavy kitchen knife. 10 minutes later, the comforting flash of headlights swept across my living room. When the officers arrived, they did a full sweep of the property. They found no one outside. But when they checked my backyard, one of them called me over, his voice low and serious. There were footprints again. But this time, they led directly to the small basement window. It was unlocked. One of the officers shined a powerful flashlight inside, and there, on the dirty glass, were smudged fingerprints. On the inside, someone had been in my house. The officers stayed until sunrise and promised extra patrols. They said the tracks in the mud looked a few days old, but the boot patterns matched the ones from the first night. They were from the same person. A few days later, Mrs. Dale called me again. She sounded absolutely terrified. Her voice was just a whisper. She said her own security camera had picked something up the night the police came. It showed someone walking from my backyard, across the street, and toward the dark woods at the edge of the neighborhood. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice dropped even lower. She said, "He stopped, and he looked right at my camera. I think it's the same man from your porch." I moved out 2 weeks later. I couldn't stay there another night. I broke my lease, packed my things, and never looked back. I thought that was the end of it. But months later, the new tenant who moved into the house contacted me. He asked if I'd left something behind in the attica, small, old Polaroid camera. I told him no, it wasn't mine. He said he found one undeveloped picture still inside it. Out of curiosity, he had it processed. He sent me the photo. It was a picture of me, sleeping in my bed, taken from the corner of my own room.
The voice through the baby monitor. This story still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. It happened about 5 years ago, when my son Owen was only 3. We had just moved into my late aunt's house after she passed away. The place had been empty for almost 2 years. A small 2-story home, tucked at the edge of a quiet rural neighborhood in Maine. It seemed perfect for us, peaceful, affordable, and full of family memories. But sometimes peace has a cost you don't understand until it's too late. The first few weeks were uneventful. I spent my days unpacking, fixing the plumbing, and trying to get used to the creaks and pops of an old house, settling after years of silence. At night, I'd put Owen to bed upstairs and sit in the living room with his baby monitor nearby, just to make sure he was okay. He was a light sleeper, and I didn't want him waking up scared in a new place. It started one night around 1:30 a.m. I was half asleep on the couch when I heard a faint whisper through the monitor. At first, I thought Owen had woken up and was talking to himself again. But then I heard something that made me sit up straight. A woman's voice. She said, softly, "Is he asleep yet?" It wasn't coming from my phone or the TV. It was definitely the monitor. I froze, staring at it, waiting for the voice again. The static buzzed, then faded back to silence. My heart was pounding, but I told myself it was probably interference, maybe from a neighbor's device. These things could cross signals, right? The next morning, I checked the house from top to bottom. Doors locked. Windows sealed. Nothing seemed off. Still, I couldn't shake the unease. The next few nights were quiet. Then, about a week later, the whisper came again. Same question. Same tone. "Is he asleep yet?" This time, I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my phone and opened the monitor app to check the live feed. The camera pointed at Owen's crib, like usual. But I noticed something strange. A faint shadow in the lower corner of the frame, close to the floor. It wasn't moving, just sitting there. I zoomed in. My stomach turned cold. It looked like the outline of someone crouched beside the crib. I bolted up the stairs, nearly tripping as I ran. When I burst into Owen's room, he was sitting up, rubbing his eyes. The space beside his crib was empty. I checked the closet, under the bed, even behind the curtains. Nothing. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I called the local police and explained what I saw. The officer who came, a man named Ray Harlow, listened politely, but seemed skeptical. He checked the windows and doors, finding no sign of forced entry. He told me it might have been a glitch, a shadow distortion. But 2 nights later, the voice returned, this time louder. Through the monitor, I heard quiet footsteps, then that same whisper. Right next to the microphone, he's awake. I ran upstairs again. But when I opened the door, Owen wasn't in his crib. My heart nearly stopped until I found him standing by the wall. Staring up at the attic hatch above the closet, he pointed up and said, "Mommy." She went up there. There was no way he could have reached that hatch. I called Officer Harlow again, voice shaking. He arrived 20 minutes later, with another patrol car. They brought a flashlight and a ladder and opened the attic door. Dust rained down. The air that came out smelled like old wood and mildew. Then one of the officers whispered, "Ma'am, you might want to come see this." I climbed halfway up the ladder and looked. The attic was littered with small things, half-eaten food, children's toys, a stack of crumpled blankets. But what made my stomach drop were the dozens of small holes drilled into the ceiling, each one perfectly aligned over the bedrooms. Someone had been living up there, watching, listening. Among the blankets was a small tape recorder, still running. Officer Harlow hit play. The tape hissed before a faint female voice came through. "She's back. Be quiet. Don't wake him." They found traces of footprints in the insulation and an old sleeping bag wedged behind a beam. Whoever had been up there was gone. But not for long. A week later, when I went to pack up and move, I found something tucked behind Owen's dresser. A note written in shaky handwriting. "He's such a good sleeper. You shouldn't have come back here." That was the last night I ever stepped foot in that house. The hidden door in apartment 406. This happened about 3 years ago when I moved to a small city apartment after leaving a long-term relationship. I wanted something quiet, affordable, and within walking distance to work. I found a second-floor unit in an older building downtown. The apartment was cozy, 1 bedroom, a tiny kitchen, and a small living room with large windows. Nothing fancy, but it was mine, and that's all that mattered at the time. At first life there was uneventful. I got to know my neighbors, unpacked my things, and tried to settle into the rhythm of city living. One evening, while organizing my closet, I noticed something odd, a small rectangular panel at the bottom corner of the wall near the bedroom. It was just big enough for someone to crawl through if they were determined. The panel looked like it had been painted over and forgotten. I assumed it was some old utility access and didn't give it much thought. Then, about a week later, strange things started happening. I would leave my apartment for work or errands, and when I returned, small items seemed to be slightly out of place. A book shifted, a pair of socks moved, my coffee mug facing the wrong way. I chalked it up to absent-mindedness at first. But the feeling of being watched kept growing. One night, around 11 p.m., I was reading in bed when I heard a faint scraping sound coming from the bedroom wall. I froze, straining to listen. The sound was soft, like someone was dragging their fingernails along the wooden panel I had noticed before. My stomach tightened. I grabbed a flashlight and cautiously approached it. The panel was warm to the touch. I hesitated for a moment, my hand trembling, before pulling it open. Inside was a narrow crawl space, just big enough for a person to fit. The smell hit me immediately, damp, musty, and faintly metallic. Someone had been living in there, no doubt. I couldn't see much beyond the first few feet, but I found scraps of old newspaper, a small blanket, and a broken flashlight. The next morning, I called the building manager. She seemed uneasy and insisted she had no idea the panel existed or that anyone had ever lived there. She promised to investigate. But I could tell she wasn't taking it seriously. A few nights later, the situation escalated. I was asleep when I heard footsteps in the living room. At first, I thought it was a dream, but then the sound of the front door latch clicking made my blood run cold. Someone was inside my apartment. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, whispering my address to the operator. The footsteps grew louder, moving closer to the bedroom. I remembered the crawl space. Without thinking, I flipped open the panel and crawled inside, pulling the panel closed behind me. The space was dark and cramped, but I could hear everything. The intruder moving around, searching for something. My heart raced. The operator's voice came softly through the phone, telling me to stay quiet and stay hidden. Minutes passed like hours. I heard the sound of the front door opening and closing. Then, silence. Eventually, I called out softly, and a voice from the other side said, "I know you're in there. Come out." I didn't move. The intruder left after a few more minutes. When the police arrived, they found no one, but they did find fingerprints around the crawlspace panel, and evidence that someone had been living there for weeks. After that night, I moved out immediately. The building was renovated shortly after, and the crawlspace was sealed permanently. I never found out who had been living there, or what they wanted. But I know one thing. Someone had been inside my home, watching, waiting, and choosing not to leave until they felt ready. Even now, years later, the memory of that hidden door and the footsteps outside my bedroom at night still haunts me. I never stayed in a place that long again, and I always check every corner, every panel, every strange crack in the wall. Some things in life are better left unexplored, and some intruders are better left unidentified. All three stories, the garage invasion, the baby monitor whisper, and the hidden crawlspace, highlight how terrifying and personal home intrusions can be. They're not just about stolen items. They're about the invasion of safety, trust, and the feeling that someone knows your home better than you do.